Senator Garn has just returned from talking to the families at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. He's been kind enough to take a moment or two at Andrews Air Force Base in suburban Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., to talk with us. Senator Garn, is there anything that you got from the families? Did they say anything to you that you feel you can or want to pass along?
Well, I was fortunate enough to go with the Vice President and Senator John Glenn to visit with the families. And obviously, it was a very difficult meeting. You always feel inadequate and not knowing exactly what to say to try and comfort the families. The thing that I was so impressed with is Mrs. Scobie, the commander's wife, stood up when we came in and said, "Mr. Vice President and Senators, I think I speak for all of the families here that we want you to know that we want the space program to continue. We don't want it delayed. We know that our loved ones would want it to continue, and as tragic an accident as this has been, and as sad as it is, don't let it stop the space program." It was very, very touching and very difficult for us.
As any of us who've known them knows, Senator Garn, and as Tom Wolfe wrote so eloquently in his book, The Right Stuff, being a pilot's wife, a military pilot's wife, who some of these women had been for a very long time, is trying under the best of circumstances, to say nothing of circumstances in which your husband and the father of your children is going to ride a machine such as one of these space shuttles. You made that trip once. At about the 1 minute and 12 or 15-second mark, do you remember what you were thinking on your flight?
Well, during that period of time, the solid rocket boosters burn for 2 minutes, and it's very rough and it's very noisy. And so you thinking how exciting it is, how wonderful it is. Within a few more minutes, about another 6 minutes, you're going to be in orbit and be able to look back at the Earth. And when the 2 minutes are over, it dramatically smooths down. So you're relieved to get rid of the solid rocket boosters. They were about halfway to that point. I'm sure they were extremely excited, ecstatic about getting into space after being delayed a couple of days. I'm sure they were very happy and very excited at that point and thinking about what a wonderful, fantastic experience it would be in just a few minutes to be orbiting the Earth.
Senator Garn, do you remember what you saw and what you heard at that moment? Were you praying? Did you have your eyes open or closed? What did you see and feel and hear?
Well, at that moment, again, you're halfway through the solid rocket booster burn. As I remember, Charlie Walker, who was sitting next to me in the mid-deck, were clapping and shaking hands because we came within only 55 seconds of being canceled, and that was all we had left in our flight window for that morning. So we were cheering and clapping and shaking hands about that point into the flight.
Senator Garn, thank you very much for being with us this evening. I trust that you passed along, you and Vice President Bush, the respect, honor, and sympathy of the nation to those families. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. We did.
The stunned shock in the hometown of teacher Krista McAuliffe. The equally solemn and sad reaction in the Houston suburb where so many NASA astronauts and employees live, Clear Lake City, Texas, near the Johnson Space Center. Martha Teichner is there.
The town where astronauts live and work closed ranks. There was no information, just this sign, "Turn on your lights and pray for our astronauts." People did. An armed guard stood outside Mission Commander Dick Scobie's house tonight. The Johnson Space Center, where reporters are usually dished out data by the pound, got nothing. There were no news releases, no interviews. Nobody connected with the space shuttle was allowed to talk. A stunning, staggering silence was NASA's response to the tragedy that was inevitable someday. From those terrible minutes just after the launch, as the technicians who worked with the crew helped them in and out of their simulators, called them by their first names, realized what had happened. There was a compulsion to be near a television, to see the explosion replayed over and over. Tourists stood near NASA workers, their faces full of their feelings.
7 people snuffed, and the only thing good you can say about it is that they didn't feel it.
But when you saw it, it totally was engulfed. My God, what a sight.
One by one, the flags up and down NASA Road 1 were lowered to half-mast, and people stared at them, disbelieving. The walls at PT's restaurant are covered with pictures of astronauts, including 3 members of the Shuttle Challenger's dead crew. No astronauts came in tonight for dinner. or happy hour.
Oh, it just doesn't seem possible that they never come in here again.
So far, mourning has been an individual matter. Here, where astronauts live and work, it is everybody's tragedy. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Clear Lake City, Texas.
This horrible tragedy, this moment so vividly burned in our minds, it is one of those events that many of us are likely never to forget. Even now, many hours after we first saw that horrific ball of flame, it is hard to believe it happened at all. Bernard Goldberg looks at America's reaction to the deaths of 7 of our own.
T-minus 15 seconds. In the American mind, it had become routine, all those successful launches. In reality, of course, it never was routine, not for all the Americans who would watch close up, and certainly not for the people who would ride the shuttle into space. No, it never was routine, and at 11:39 Eastern Standard Time this morning, the proof exploded before our eyes.
You just can't believe that something like that has happened initially, and then when it sinks in, you know, it's just like, you know, losing a member of your family.
Today, our shock turns to sadness. We salute those who risked and gave their lives to serve our country at the last great frontier.
And in the small towns around the Cape, this American tragedy was a community tragedy as well.
This community has been a part of the Space Center and its progress. We've shared the joys. Certainly today, we've shared a great tragedy.
I was a school teacher myself for 31.5 years, and I taught the age that she left, and it really touched my heart. I have grandchildren the same age.
I was at first shocked because I didn't know what had happened and thought it was a dream that you'd wake up out of.
They were pioneers with high hopes and old-fashioned courage. They made it look like fun. So, in the American mind, it was becoming routine. Of course, it never was. This is Bernard Goldberg.
President Reagan had planned to deliver his State of the Union speech tonight, and at one point today, the president said he was going ahead with it, but he quickly changed his mind just a bit later, and instead, as Leslie Stahl tells us, he scrapped the State of the Union speech, postponed it until next week for a special address today to a nation in a state of shock.
President Reagan ordered all flags on public buildings flown at half-staff, proclaiming a week of national mourning, leading the country in what he called our pain. The president said, "I just can't rid myself of the thought of the sacrifice and the families."
The families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy.
The president has taken a keen interest in the space program ever since 1982, when he was the honored guest at the happy landing of the shuttle Columbia. Ironically, the Challenger was flown overhead that day in a proud salute to the commander-in-chief. Despite the sorrow of today's tragedy, the president said the program will go on.
There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue.
It was President Reagan's idea to send civilians into space and to make a teacher the first. He spoke to the teacher finalists in June.
When one of you blasts off from Cape Kennedy next January, you will be representing that hope and opportunity and possibility. You will be the emissary to the next generation of American heroes.
The President and Mrs. Reagan are here tonight at home, Mr. Reagan having postponed his upbeat State of the Union address. At first, he said he was going to go ahead with the speech because, and I quote, "You can't stop governing the nation because of a tragedy of this kind." But then after congressmen, Republicans and Democrats urged a cancellation, it was finally decided that the budget was not what most Americans want to hear about tonight. This is Leslie Stahl at the White House.
From the great Atlantic Ocean to the wide Pacific shore, a nation mourns 7 heroes. From New Hampshire to Florida to Texas and beyond, they saw a space shuttle explode into smithereens. 7 lives lost just like that. The danger of space flight is real. That was real fire, real flames, and real death. But says President Reagan, we will continue our quest in space. Is it worth the risk? Has the space program come too far, too fast? We'll examine those questions when our coverage of the Challenger disaster continues.